Bom dia a todos, meu nome é Leonardo Nemer Caldeira Brant, eu presido o Centro de Direito Internacional com sede em Belo Horizonte. É com muita alegria que eu saúdo a todos os presentes, saúdo igualmente os professores internacionais e nacionais que irão estar conosco durante essas 2 semanas, durante o 16º curso de Direito Internacional. Eu gostaria de dizer que, em primeiro lugar, esse curso foi todo desenhado num novo modelo online. Nós já estamos aí no 16º curso desse gênero. Ele foi totalmente adaptado às novas circunstâncias, o que, de certa forma, permitiu também uma extensão do número de participantes, de professores internacionais e nacionais participantes. Temos este ano 19 grandes nomes do direito internacional que estarão presentes conosco durante essas 2 semanas. Num primeiro momento, portanto, eu gostaria de agradecer a todos os professores que colaboraram conosco, que estarão conosco nesse período, com palestras muito interessantes sobre temas dos mais variados do direito internacional. A todos eles, o meu muito obrigado. Em segundo lugar, saúdo e agradeço também aos alunos, aos estudantes que estão participando neste período de julho, conosco durante essas 2 semanas. O nosso também muito obrigado. Esse é um curso que envolve uma grande equipe do Centro de Direito Internacional, a qual eu tenho o imenso orgulho de colaborar e de presidir. Ele é um curso que pretende trazer para o Brasil e para a nossa América Latina o mesmo modelo de cursos que, de forma quase centenária, já é uma tradição nos países europeus e nas principais universidades do mundo. Portanto, para nós uma grande satisfação que tenhamos ele já há mais de uma década no Brasil. O curso de inverno de Direito Internacional, com toda a sua abrangência e extensão, não seria possível de ser realizado igualmente se não fosse a relevante parceria e a confiança e o apoio da Fundação Konrad Adenauer no Brasil. A ela estendo um caloroso agradecimento e tenho a certeza de que estamos contribuindo juntos para os valores do direito internacional, para os valores dos direitos humanos, para os valores do Estado Democrático de Direito, para os valores da democracia e, com certeza, para a compreensão e construção de um mundo, de um universo internacional mais justo e mais equilibrado. Portanto, agradeço de forma calorosa ao apoio da Fundação Konrad Adenauer no Brasil. Gostaria, portanto, de dar início ao 16º curso de inverno de Direito Internacional, esperando que todos tenhamos 2 semanas de muitas atividades e aprendizado. Um forte abraço a todos.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on you are watching from. My name is Maíra Thaís Andrade Ribeiro, and I'm a professor of international law at the University of José do Rosário Velano, Unifenas, in Brazil. And I will be your moderator today on the 16th waiting course of international law. I'm so glad to be here with you today because this is such a well-renowned course. And I would like to thank you, the sitting staff, and especially Professor Leonardo Nemer. We have today a very special guest, the Professor Pierre Bodeau Livinec. So let me introduce him. He is a professor of international law at the University of Paris-Nanterre. He is also a consultant in international law for the European Union and an associate research at the Laura Pack Research Center of International Law. So, during the seminar today, I invite you, our audience, to comment and post some questions for our guest speaker in the chat session. I will take a look at this and towards the end of the seminar, passing some of this on to him. But without further ado, now I will give him to the floor. Thank you so much, Professor Pierre, for being here with us today. I'm such a pleasure here. I stay here with you today. It's such an honor to all of us. You give the floor, Professor Pierre. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrade, for these very kind words of introduction. And I should, by way of introduction, say two things. First of all, I want to say hello to everyone. I don't see you, but I hope you hear me. I am currently in the southwest of France. It's a beautiful sun here. It's early afternoon, and it's my pleasure to spend this afternoon with you. I should also say that I was very glad and honored to receive this invitation from the setting of my very good friend, Leonardo Brandt, whom I thank very much. I remember having spent some time in Belo Horizonte, I think it was back in 2013, to give some lectures on responsibility, actually. And even though today is a bit different, because of COVID-19, I receive invitations to speak all over the world, but in my room, in my office, without moving, which is new and strange, but still I like it. Today, I want to speak, and I will explain my perspective. I want to speak about international organizations, or more generally, multilateralism, in light of the reaction to the COVID-19. And I will explain in a minute how and why I want to deal with that topic now. I should say that although, again, I don't see you, I am very open to questions, to remarks, to criticism, even. It doesn't matter to me. I am very happy to engage with you. You should take advantage of this opportunity as much as you want, and I'll do my best to answer your questions if I can answer them. And if I can't, I will tell you I can't. And so I will speak for, 45, 50 minutes to introduce the topic, and then owing to Mayra, I will answer your questions. When Mrs. Neves, whom I thank, to approach me to give this lecture, I kind of hesitated about the topic. I could have chosen a specific or classical topic, but I decided I would focus on a current topic, that of multilateralism, the evolution of multilateralism in light of COVID-19. Why did I hesitate? I hesitated for two reasons. One is a personal one. I am always kind of reluctant to react in the heat to events. I think we as academics, as researchers, we need to take some time to reflect on what is going on. And sometimes we need to refrain from reacting too quickly to events, just to take the time to think, if you want. So I took that time to think a little bit more to what is going on, of course, from the standpoint of international law. The second reason is because my own thoughts as an academic on this are still evolving. They are still moving. I don't have firm views on everything because the situation itself is moving. And I think as a researcher, as an international law scholar, we have to remain humble, modest, and say that maybe we don't have an answer, a legal answer to anything. This is part of our job to be humble and modest. Now, my focus today will not be the reaction itself of international organizations to COVID-19. A lot has been written on that already in blogs everywhere. Every day we receive analysis, messages on the reaction of international organizations such as the WHO, World Health Organization, the United Nations, or regional organizations, their reactions to the pandemics. My focus will not be on that because you have already, if you want, a lot of information on this. My focus will be on international organizations themselves. My focus will be, but the question is a very simple one in a way. What does the current crisis, the current health crisis, what does it say about the evolution of international organizations? What does it tell us about the crisis of international organizations? This will be my focus. From the standpoint of international law, the starting question, the starting point is a fairly simple one. It's quite straightforward. Can we consider that the pandemic crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, is it so new as far as international organizations are concerned? Is it so unexpected, and the reaction of international organizations would itself be unexpected? My own assessment is that this kind of newness is not obvious at all. If we take the classical criticism put against the multilateral system in general, then we see that the current crisis, the current health crisis, does not, change much as to the line of criticism against international organizations. Let me take two examples of these kind of criticisms to start with. The first critique is the lack of reaction, the lack of reactivity by international organizations. The second criticism is the lack of coordination and cooperation within international organizations. So, how does it work as far as the answer to the COVID-19 crisis is concerned? Lack of reaction by international organizations, it's true. It's true. It took, as we all know, more than a month, which is a lot of time, of course, when you are facing a health crisis. It took more than a month to the WHO for the Director General of WHO to declare a situation of public health emergency of international reach. The declaration, that very important declaration, because it triggers the reaction by the whole system, that reaction, that statement was made by the Director General of WHO on 30 January 2020, 30 January, almost 1 month after the first signs that something was getting very wrong in China and spreading in Asia and in other parts of the world. So lack of reaction, that is probably very true as far as the WHO is concerned. It's also true as far as the United Nations is concerned. Let me give you one example of that. The General Assembly, the United Nations General Assembly. As you probably all know, the General Assembly does not have any binding power, legally speaking. But its resolutions, its statement even though they are not binding, may have a huge echo because they reflect the first reaction by the international community of states in facing a global crisis. So the statement made by the General Assembly is a very important one, even though it's not binding. The problem is that the first official reaction by the General Assembly to the COVID-19 crisis was made on 2nd of April 2020. 2nd of April. 3 months, almost, yes, but more than 3 months after the beginning of the crisis. And that first reaction, which is actually General Assembly Resolution 74/270. Sorry, no, that's the second one. Yes, the first one, sorry. The first one on 2nd of April 2020 is UNGA Resolution 74/270. It's an empty text. It says nothing. It's a 2-page document which says absolutely nothing. You will have to wait until 20 April 2020 to have a more substantive resolution by the General Assembly. It's resolution 74/274, 74/274. In that resolution, the General Assembly calls for international cooperation to give world access to medication, vaccine, when vaccine will be available, to face COVID-19, the COVID-19 epidemics. So you see, more than 3 months to have a first reaction by the General Assembly, and I will talk about the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, in a minute. The first resolution adopted by the General Assembly, the first substantive one, has been adopted on 20 April 2020. The same day, the General Assembly has adopted another resolution which has nothing to do with what we are talking about today. Directly nothing to do. This resolution of the same day deals with an international day to reflect upon the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. So it sets an international day to reflect on the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. Why do I mention that? I mention that because, as you know, I suppose, this terrible tragedy of the genocide in Rwanda, in 1994, was another event on which the UN was hugely criticized for failing to react. The United Nations were informed of the possibility of a genocide in Rwanda in 1994, and they failed to take appropriate action to prevent the genocide and to stop it when it started to happen in April 1994 in Kigali, Rwanda. So you see, my point here, my very simple point is, yes, the main international organizations in the field have failed to react in due course to the COVID-19 crisis. But it's not the first time that international organizations fail to react in appropriate terms to a huge global crisis. I'm not happy with that, but that's just a matter of fact. And I think I should have said that from the beginning. Before I became a professor in the French system at Paris Nanterre, I had several positions. One of these positions was I held office at the United Nations in New York at the Office of Legal Affairs for 4 years. So I know a little bit of the United Nations from the inside, because I was there from 2006 to, 2010. So that's just to explain, my personal interest in what the UN does. Second criticism, the lack of coordination and cooperation. Well, I will talk about regional organizations later, about the European Union, but and maybe you will teach me things about the OAS, the reaction by the Inter-American system. But I believe that regional organizations have been quite late in reacting and in cooperating fully on that. But for the time being, let's stick to universal organizations. Lack of coordination, there is one striking example. That is the United Nations Security Council. Still today, we are waiting, if I may say so, for a proper reaction by the Security Council to the COVID-19 pandemics. There have been a number of statements by the President of the Security Council, but no resolution adopted by the Security Council with significant content on the COVID-19. You may tell me, well, Professor, it's only normal that the Security Council does not have anything to say about COVID-19, which is a health crisis and not a peace and security issue. I would say you are right in principle, but you are wrong in practice. You are right in principle because as its name says, the only job the Security Council has in the world is to provide peace and security. It's a very important and demanding job, but that's its only job. So in principle, if you would say that to me, you would be right. But in practice, we all know that since the early 1990s, the Security Council, I mean, it's in early 1990s, it seems like yesterday for me, but for you, most of you are very young, so probably, it's not, doesn't say much, but, 1994, that's the victory of Brazil in the World Cup. And 1998, it's the victory of France in the World Cup. So that's good, pillars. That's good pillars to know where we stand. Well, since the early 1990s, the Security Council, as we all know, has been very keen and dynamic in seeing threats to peace and security everywhere. The change of a democratic regime in Haiti, for example, in 1994, threat to peace and security. Terrorist attacks in 2001 in the United States of America, threat to peace and security. The Ebola crisis in Africa and elsewhere, threat to peace and security. So now it has become quite, common that the Security Council deals with almost everything as long as its members, and in particular its permanent members, agree to react to something. On COVID-19, nothing. Not a single reaction. That lack of reaction is very striking. But at the same time, again, it's not entirely new. If you take some of the biggest issues in global politics right now, Palestine, for example, other crises in Tibet, in Crimea, between Ukraine and Russia, for obvious reasons. These crises are not dealt with by the Security Council. So, it happens from time to time that the Council remains silent. Let me just wrap it up for 1 minute. Lack of reactivity, yes, but it has happened in the past. Lack of coordination and cooperation, yes, but it happens from time to time. And then there is, I think, a third criticism which has arisen since the COVID-19 pandemic has started. And that third criticism, which is less loud than the other ones, which is less obvious, is to me the most important one and the most significant one. That last criticism is the lack of attractiveness for international organization. This is the real novelty of the crisis. It's not that international organizations have particularly failed in their reaction. They have been doing things, and we will see later in this lecture that international organizations have not remained completely silent. They have reacted. They have tried to do things. So we can't really say, I think, that they failed in a way. What we can see is that states, the sovereign members of the international community, have reacted on an isolated basis, unilaterally to the crisis, or by regional groups. They have avoided as much as they could turning to international organizations. They have, circumvented the world of international organization. And that, to me, of course, you may completely disagree with me. Again, that's perfectly fine. But to me, that's the main issue at stake and what is most worrisome. Let's put it in one word. Perhaps the COVID-19 crisis shows that international organizations have become irrelevant to some member states. And that irrelevance is, to me, a very high concern. If we don't turn to them anymore, then we will lose all the system which has been painfully built since 1945, a system of cooperation, of meetings. I will be, at some point in this lecture, I will be quite critical of the United Nations. But let's not underestimate what the UN has achieved. The United Nations is a place where you can have North Korea and South Korea sitting in the same room, Saudi Arabia and Israel and Iran sitting in the same room. These guys don't like each other, okay? It's not a friend club meeting. This is not what I say. But to have a place where all states, almost all states in the world, may gather and see each other and sometimes talk to each other. That's a very significant progress in the world. Even if you compare the UN with the former League of Nations. If international organizations become irrelevant, by that I mean if states don't turn to international organizations when they have a global problem. COVID-19 is a global issue. I mean, what does it mean to close the borders of one state if you can enter that state from another part? I am a fan of sport. what does it mean for France to close its borders if Neymar, the great Neymar, can't come back from Brazil and play for Paris in the team? Now he has come back. He's in France right now, so and he's in good health.
Okay.
Great. No, you see my point.
Yeah.
These, to be serious again, my point is, any national answer to this kind of global crisis is irrelevant, makes no sense. If you don't have a global answer, you don't deal with the issue you are facing. You need to have a global answer. And what is the best place to find a global answer? International organizations. Now, what I suggest, what I propose in this lecture for the 30 minutes or 20, 25 minutes to come, is to try to understand why there is this kind of irrelevance coming up, if you want. Try to understand that irrelevance. This is what I call, you will understand that in a minute, the figure, the face of the albatross, the bird, the big bird, the albatross. I will explain that in a minute. And once we have understood this irrelevance, I will suggest to, as a matter of conclusion, some ways to improve the system. This is what I call finding the phoenix. You see the phoenix, that this mythical bird. Today we are with bird that regenerates on its ashes, that gets rebirth on its ashes. So I will try to finish with a note of optimism and see how the system can probably improve and face this kind of situation. But first, let's start with the albatross. Let's start with the irrelevance. If you allow me, we're going to do a bit of poetry to explain the albatross. Where it is. Oh, sorry, just 1 second. I will, here it is. So, well, I think you can see here the albatross. It's a poem in French, of course, but by a very famous French poet of the 19th century, Baudelaire. And here I found the English translation of that poem. And if you allow me, I will read it. It's not very long, so that you understand why I am talking about the albatross today. That is the albatross. Often to amuse themselves, the men of a crew catch albatrosses, those vast seabirds that indolently follow a ship as it glides over the deep briny sea. Scarcely have they placed them on the deck than these kings of the sky, clumsy, ashamed, pathetically let their great white wings drag beside them like oars. That winged voyager, how weak and gauche he is, so beautiful before, now comic and ugly. One man worries his beak with a stubby clay pipe. Another limes mimics a cripple who once flew. The poet resembles this prince of cloud and sky, who frequents a tempest and laughs at the bowman. When exiled on the earth, the butt of hoots and jeers, his giant wings prevent him from walking. His giant wings prevent him from walking. This is, I think,
Beautiful.
This is, I think, a very nice image to understand the problem that international organizations are now facing. International organizations, especially at the universal level, are very noble, ambitious, attractive, and they remain attractive. So many of my students turn to me each year and tell me, Professor, I would like to work in an international organization. How could I do that? So, and it's not always easy to work in an international organization, but I can feel that international organizations remain very attractive. And yet, they are also very deceptive. And the COVID-19 crisis shows it, often, they can't fly anymore. There is a difference between their ambition and their realization. Why is it so? It is so, I believe, for a number of reasons. Internal reasons, that is, reasons which can be understood if we look at the way international organizations work, but also external reasons, that is, how international organizations are perceived by the outside world. Let me start with the internal explanations. Why is there this kind of distrust against international organizations right now? Well, it has something to do, obviously, with the limitation of competencies of international organization. Neither the WHO, the World Health Organization, nor regional organizations had, legally speaking, had the power to impose on state a rapid reaction to the COVID-19. The only body in the world which could have imposed a reaction is the Security Council. But as I have said earlier, the Security Council remained completely silent on that crisis. That situation reminds us of an internal limit to international organizations. International organizations can only do what the member states have authorized them and entitled them to do. You may remember the International Court of Justice advisory opinion in 1949 on Comte Bernadotte, the Comte Bernadotte advisory opinion. In this very famous opinion, the court explained that the United Nations has an international legal personality. It is an international person which has the possibility to claim against a state, even a non-member state, because at that time, Israel was not a member of the United Nations. So it's a very strong statement. The court, in that opinion of 1949, of 11 April 1949, the court says something which is very strange. It says, the UN has a legal personality, but it is not a state. And it is not even a super state, whatever the meaning of this expression. It's not me who say that. It's a court. In 1949, the International Court of Justice says the UN is not a super state. It's not a federal state at the universal level. What does that mean? It means that after the Second World War, some states, the US and a few others, feared that the UN could evolve as a kind of world government, a super state. Today, 70 years ago after this, today it would seem ridiculous to defend the idea that the UN is a super state. we all see that the UN and other international organizations are only what member states want them to be. Outside the realm of their competencies, they are nothing. So, you see, there is something unfair about criticizing international organizations too much. Of course, member states will turn to the WHO, will turn to the UN, will turn to regional organizations and say, you have badly reacted. But in many instances, the same member states had refused to give to the international organizations the competencies which could have allowed them to react properly to the situation. You see, that's even true, what I say, that's even true for the European Union. As you know, the European Union is a very strong and powerful organization. But as far as public health is concerned, the EU is an albatross, is another albatross. Huge wings, no possibility to fly, no power to react to that. The second internal explanations to this irrelevance of international organization is what I call the question of confidence, the question of trust or confidence. Do we still trust international organizations or not? Or more generally, do states still trust international organizations? Well, here you have a series of issues or criticism which may be made against international organization. The first one is all the bureaucracy, this administrative burden of international organization, which would be too heavy. But I will not develop that because for the sake of time, but also because I don't think that in the COVID-19 crisis, there has been anything of a kind of a too heavy bureaucracy, which would have made it impossible for the organizations to react. If we take the WHO, for example, once they took the problem seriously, they actually took it very seriously and were very good in sharing the knowledge about the disease, in giving advice to states, wear masks, test people as much as you can. So you see, once the reaction started, they were actually quite good in reacting. The second question of confidence has something to do with the way international organizations are governed. It's a problem of governance. So there are some difficulties here. You may have seen these very, let's say, embarrassing images of the WHO Director General kneeling to the President of China, Xi Jinping, when he sees him, as if China was so powerful that the Director General would have to show him so much respect. When you show too much respect to someone, it's very difficult afterwards to stand in front of him and say, look, you have to give me the right piece of information. The problem here is a real one, but let's not exaggerate it. In my view, the real problem here is that, for example, the UN Secretary General, the United Nations Secretary General, has something of it's like a pope, if you want, a non-religious pope. Sometimes, because of the personality of the Secretary General, he will be the highest civil servant of the organization, of an administrative kind. In other circumstances, the Secretary General will develop some kind of political, charismatic skills. That was the case for Kofi Annan, for example. The current Secretary General has this kind of charisma. But the point is that you can't rely on that. You need to have an entity which has sufficient power not to rely on the personal skills of someone. That's too uncharted, if you want. It's too risky business to expect that someone will stand up against the crisis. The third element, and the last element as far as this question of confidence is concerned, is the feeling of a lack of accountability by international organizations. It seems like international organizations always, or very often, let's say, very often try and escape their accountability. They don't assume the consequences of their actions, of their conduct. A very famous example of that is the reaction or the lack of the reaction by the United Nations to another pandemic, the cholera in Haiti pandemic in 2010. In that pandemic, as you know, the United Nations were suspected of having spread, of course, involuntarily, the cholera in Haiti after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. And they refused, the UN refused to assume any kind of legal responsibility for that pandemic. Well, so much for the internal explanations. Well, yes, international organization, what does it tell us? It tells us that international organizations are probably weaker than what we think usually. They don't have that many powers, even the most powerful one like the EU. They don't have a strong governance system. It's, sometimes a small governance system with no budget, and they don't have the means to be accountable, to assume the consequences of that. That is a good explanation of why states and other actors are sometimes reluctant to turn to international organizations. The other series of explanations are external. I'm going to be quicker on that. Well, what do we see right now? We see basically two big issues, two big phenomena running against the influence of international organizations. The first one is we live in a time of return to sovereignty, return to isolationism. I'm not talking time being of the, let's say, the head of states and governments, which are troublesome. I will say a few words on that in a minute. I'm just talking about states, normal states, if that exists. But as we can see, states faced with the COVID-19 have favored an unilateral approach, not a coordinating one, even when that unilateral approach gave ridiculous results. There have been instances where security and intelligence service almost have fought, almost fight in the airport, on the tarmac of the airport, to get some masks which another state wanted to get. This is where we are. states representatives fighting on the ground, fighting almost physically on the ground to get some masks, to get the vaccine before the other ones. When you see that, you see, it's a disaster. It's a disaster if we consider all the good things that multilateralism has given us in the past. So there is this idea, which to me is a very old-fashioned one, that the state could do everything. Or for states who know that they are too limited, for example, our president, the President Macron, the French president, has recently said that he wanted to support and develop a kind of, I quote him, European sovereignty, a European sovereignty. I mean, and the president of the French Republic may have some defaults. I will not come into that, but he's not stupid. When he says European sovereignty, legally speaking, it does not mean anything. The EU is not a state, it's not sovereign, and will not become sovereign in the years to come. It's impossible, okay? What does he mean by that? He says, we, France, even Germany, Spain, Italy, we are too weak to face this kind of crisis unilaterally. We have to face it at the European level, even though it's very painful. Right at the time we are talking this afternoon, there have been some negotiations all weekend since Friday, and it's still going on, to get an economic plan in the EU to save the economy of weak states facing the COVID-19. And the member states of the EU, they can't reach an agreement to help save the economy of Spain, Italy, Greece, and a few others. They can't reach an agreement. This is where we are. So this idea of sovereignty coming back explains why international organizations have become some kind of irrelevant, but at the same time, we see that sovereignty does not give any rational and convincing answer to the crisis we are facing right now. The second external explanation, and I'm not going to develop that because I'm afraid you know it quite well in Brazil, is we see emerging what I would describe as a very selfish and privatized global society. Selfish, it's all the populist governments. I don't want to make any political comments which may be embarrassing, but some of the most important or noisy leaders in the world, let's put it this way, some of the leaders who make the more noise are populists, who basically have a same line of language. We don't want international organizations anymore. Trump decides to withdraw the United States from UNESCO and now from WHO in the middle of a huge public health crisis in the world. Other states, as you know, don't want to pay anymore for international organizations. This idea that it's not only a sovereignty issue, it's a question of confidence and of truth. These leaders basically say what international organizations tell us is untrue. And that's a real problem on which I will come back in a minute as a matter of conclusion. Last point here. In French, we have an expression which says, La nature a horreur du vide. Nature hates the vacuum, the emptiness. It means that if international organizations are not able to fill the gap, to react to a crisis such as COVID-19, other actors will step in. And we already can see that. Let me give you a few examples, two examples, a good one, if I may say so, and a bad one. The good example is the influence of the Bill and Melinda Gates, you know Bill Gates, of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, one of the wealthiest men on earth, and his wife have decided to, contribute their money to health programs in the world. It's very good. It's very generous of them. But at the same time, this kind of private financial effort has a strong influence on the health programs developed by WHO. So it's not like it's neutral. Here you have a private individual who is able, because he has the money to do so, to influence public health programs in the world. And that's, in my view, as a matter of principle, it's a problem. The second example, the last example, the bad one, is pharmaceutical firms. The medication firms like Sanofi, the French one. Well, these are private economic entities. They go where profit appears most secure and biggest. Sanofi say, I will deliver the vaccine first to the United States because they pay. So that's a problem. On the one hand, we have the General Assembly of the United Nations calling for world coordination to give access to medication and to vaccine. On the other hand, those who are researching on this vaccine medication, and we may find and will produce this vaccine, already say, even though we don't have the vaccine yet, already say we will give that vaccine first to those who pay. What about Africa? What about some part of Latin America, Asia, where you have some very poor communities? When will these people have the possibility to get proper access to medication and vaccination in the Brazilian favelas, to give only one example? Now, let me conclude, I have talked too long, with some words of optimism. Let's look for the phoenix. Let's forget about the albatross and look for the phoenix, the mythical bird which regenerates from this, from its ashes. I think we should not have too high expectations for international organization. One part of the problem is that we expect too much from them, more than they can actually deliver. And we also know that it's almost impossible to reform the system. Of course, we can make some reform on the specific part, but a general reform of the system is almost impossible. Let me show you a second document very quickly. Here we are. Up. Here we are. So here, what you have, I hope you can see it, it's the official text of the United Nations Charter, the 1945 San Francisco Charter. Let's have a look at Article 108 and 109 of the Charter. That is, the the provisions on the possibility to amend or to revise the charter, the treaty. Well, if you look at these two provisions, 108 and 109, you see that it's impossible to reform the UN system without the approval of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. They have, one way or the other, directly or indirectly, they have to accept the revision for the revision to come into force. Okay. Well, when you get that, when you see that, you understand that the system is almost impossible to reform. Today, it's almost impossible to get the agreement of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council to get a significant reform of the system, in particular, a reform of the Security Council itself. So let's not have too many expectations on international organizations. We can't really change them. We can't really reform them. And in a way, it also means that they will stay. They will not disappear. The United Nations will not disappear. It will stay there. So as it is, with its weaknesses, but also with its experience. And this is where we can actually reflect on the ways to improve the system. There are different ways to improve the system, and I will give you 3 of them. The first, to finish, that's my last words, promise. First, the first way to improve the system is to improve the legitimacy of the system. Identify common values common to the whole community. We have done that in the past. We have done that as far as the law of the sea was concerned in the Montego Convention of 1982, where we recognized that the resources on the high seas, under the high seas, belong to the global human to the mankind, to humankind. We have done that more recently as far as climate change was concerned. We have created this intergovernmental panel on climate change. Why not creating an intergovernmental panel on public health today? That is something very feasible, and having scientific experts giving us objectively a picture of the reality is something that would be very significant and would enhance the legitimacy of the system. Just to fight against this idea that international organizations do not tell the truth. They do. Second way of improvement, enhancing further the effectiveness, the efficiency of the system, not the legitimacy, the efficiency of the system. Well, international organizations are very good at doing technical things, as in providing us with statistics, for example, objective statistics of what's going on. And that's very important. We can't form a sound political decision or economic decision without good statistical picture of the situation. Let's work on that. Let's give an international organization means to improve their statistical skill, to give us the technical aspect which states often lack. Only a few states have the scientific expertise to follow pandemics of such a large scale as the COVID-19 pandemics. Very few states in the world have the possibility to react to that and to have even a good picture of what's going on. How many people are infected? How many people have died? Where are they located? What kind of communities are most exposed to this kind of pandemics? Why, etc., etc. Okay. Last, and that will be my last word. We need to develop the system of accountability of international organization and of monitoring. That is, having the possibility developed within organization and in parallel to organization, possibilities to monitor their work and to develop this culture of accountability, which in my view is a very important one. So that is it. You have an albatross, you have a phoenix, and I think the phoenix is something that is a bird which we should not completely forget because it still has some future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pierre. It's such a beautiful class we have today. I think all the people was sending us have the same feeling that I feel right now. Such a better thing. So, Professor, we have 30 minutes for the questions of our audience. So I think we can make some rounds, a first round and a second round of the questions. So I can read.
I think we have a bit more than 10 minutes. Huh? I think we have probably 20 minutes, I think.
Okay, Professor. So let me see. We have some interesting questions here. Camargo Alves asks, Professor, do you admit the constitutionalization of international organizations as a possible part of the future of international law? What do you think about it?
Well, I think the constitutionalization of international organization is an old dream, and I don't believe it will materialize in the classical sense. It may materialize in another sense, but in the first sense, that is, having a world constitution is coming back to this idea I mentioned earlier, the 1949 advisory opinion, the idea that the international organization could act as superstates. You have a constitutionalization. For example, the United Nations Charter would be a kind of world constitution. It is not. It is not a world constitution. It has not been adopted by the peoples. Well, let's look at that again, if you allow me. Here it is. So that's the charter again.
Yeah.
That's the charter again. But let me show you this. As we all know, the charter starts with a lie, a beautiful lie, but still a lie. We, the peoples of the United Nations, it sounds like a constitution. The people of the world have adopted the charter. We, the peoples of the UN. Look at the end of the preamble. This part. Accordingly, our respective governments, through representative assembly, blah, 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 who have exhibited their full powers, have adopted. The charter is a treaty, like any other treaty. So in that sense, if you want, I don't believe in the dream of a world government and a world constitution. So my answer to you, my first answer to you would be no. I don't believe in that dream. Sorry to be a bit realistic. But my second answer, if we look legally to the issue, would be more cautious. There is some kind of constitutionalization, legally speaking, if we consider that the most important international treaties, like the Charter and a few other documents, have created a set of common values. Peace and security, respect for human rights, respect for the principle of self-determination of peoples. Here we have some kind of, not a constitution of a state, formally speaking, but we have constitutional values. That is, values which are common to the whole community. I was mentioning, I could not find the English word, but I found it again. This idea of the common heritage of mankind, le patrimoine commun de l'humanité, the common heritage of mankind, is made of constitutional values, that is, values which are shared by all members of the international community and have a high normative value. They belong to jus cogens, have a high normative value in the system. Let me just show you the last element here. Sorry, just 1 second. A very famous provision of the Charter. Here you have it, Article 103 of the Charter. In the event of conflict between obligations of the members of the UN under the present charters and their obligations under any other international agreement, their obligations under the Charter shall prevail. Here you have a sign of a constitutional dimension of the Charter, legally speaking.
Professor, thank you very much. We have another question here. I think it's so interesting. Thais Albuquerque, student Thais Albuquerque asks, Professor, not all countries agree with the WHO recommendations. Would an international treaty be feasible to formalize the recommendations to be taken by countries in case of the pandemic? I thought she asks about we can make some treaty to foreseeable the countries adopted the recommendation of WHO. What do you think about it? So interesting.
Well, thank you for this very relevant question too. But I will answer that question with a question.
Okay.
Who makes treaties? You say, Professor Andrade, we could make a treaty, or the students say I am only a professor. I don't make treaties. I have my own ideas about treaties or what they should include, how they should look, but I don't make treaties. States make treaties. States draft treaties. So it's not like, oh yes, let's do a beautiful treaties to, if you want, give some binding power to the World Health Organization recommendation. I'm sorry to sound a bit pessimistic, but states just don't want to do that. Treaties are old-fashioned. They don't want to engage into multilateral treaties anymore. Look at the Paris Agreement on climate change. We're not even sure it's a real treaty, and the US say it's not a real treaty anyway. So states are very reluctant to engage into the treaty exercise. But I don't think that a treaty would solve anything. What we need to do, that's why I concluded my intervention with the emphasis on monitoring. We have, legally speaking, all is in place to adapt our policies. The WHO has, as you all know, an international sanitary regulation system. it makes recommendations which have to be followed by member states one way or the other. The system is in place. We don't need to create a new system. We need to make the system more efficient. That is, we need to remind the member states that they have to comply and to apply this system of recommendations. Okay, so just to summarize, let's not enter into the nightmare of negotiating a new treaty. Let's just apply the treaties we have, apply the international health regulations of the WHO, which is a very good system, which we already have. And if you already use the existing mechanisms, that would already be quite good.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much. We have someone question, so especially because it's about the albatross syndrome. So Rodrigo Franco asks, Professor, is this albatross syndrome a monopoly of international organizations? Or would you say that states also have wings large enough to fly in a world largely institutionalized?
Well, Rodrigo, it's a very good question. I think that international organizations, in some respect, have acted like a child. You know, I have 3 kids, and you know how kids are. They always tend to want to get more, especially when it's sweet and candies, than you can and than you should give them. And international organizations are a bit like that. They have, at some point, considered that they could do everything, that they could have very large wings and deal with any issue. And the Security Council of the United Nations has acted this way in the last 30 years, with a lot of problems created by this kind of conduct. So what I find very interesting in this crisis, in the current crisis, is that it shows that the over-ambitious international organizations don't work. They don't have the means to work, and this is not what the members of the international community want. But that does not mean that we should throw the whole system of international organization and multilateralism in a basket and forget about it. Not at all. I think that we need to reduce the wings. We need to make it more modest, to make it more relevant. They are still useful. The international organizations, tell us exactly what the problem again is, which are the human communities which are most affected by the crisis and so on. And this is what we need to work on. Okay. So I think international organizations have a responsibility in what is going on. They have given us a dream that they could do everything and act as a world government. And today we see that this dream does not materialize. It does not correspond to reality. So let's come back to reality. International organizations can only do what we allow them to do, what states allow them to do, and we should start from there.
I totally agree, Professor Bodeau. So we have someone question. So interesting too. Fernando asks, Fernando Porto de Sá. Professor, if international law remains largely the same regardless of the pandemic, which role can the international lawyer play in this new landscape of multilateralism? What do you think about it, please?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very good question. I think because It's a very good question for me as an international lawyer. What can I do as an international lawyer? And I think that to answer that question, we need to understand better what international law is and what it is not. To the former student, I replied, I am not making treaties. We are not making treaties. So we are not a legislative branch. We are here to understand what law is, and to put it very simply, international law to me is our common language. This is the language we all talk in the world, and we all understand to find common solutions. So we international lawyers, how can we help? We can help by designing rules which are the most effective to answer this kind of crisis, and by having an open vision of the tools we have. The treaty, I may be wrong, but for the reasons I've already explained, I don't believe that much in treaties right now. I would refrain from negotiating a treaties for years and years, and I would work on the basis of soft law instruments. They are soft law, they are not binding, but yet they are here as a kind of common language. So law does not solve problem. It's not its role. The law does not solve problems, it helps understanding them, putting words on issues to help solving them. That is what we need to do. And this is already a huge task, okay? So let's work from that understanding. What can we do? Help states talking the same language, reminding them of what we have in common, what the law recognizes as what we have in common. That's already a lot.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much. The last question, but not the least, we have a question interesting too. Marina Marra asks, Professor, what is your opinion about leaders who underestimate the COVID-19 crisis and focus more in the economic problem rather than taking the health measures indicated by the WHO? The last, unfortunately.
Well, that's not the least, as you said, and thank
Yeah.
Marina for her very difficult question. What I think personally of these leaders does not really matter, but as you can guess, probably, I think that this kind of reasoning is a disaster, of course. Because the disaster is to oppose a public health policy with economic consideration. I'm not saying that the economic side of the issue does not matter. It matters very much, but it has to be combined with the public health situation. Let me give you a broader example. As you may know, the whole system of international investment law has been created initially to protect the private investor from the power of the host state, the state hosting the investment. In recent years, we have seen a shift in the balance of international investment law. The private investors, and that is true in Latin America sometimes, the private investors are sometimes more influential than the host states, than the sovereign states. And I think that the current crisis helps us reflecting on the balance to be found between the financial, economic requirements, exigencies on the one side, and the public health in common interest on the other side. We need to be able to give the possibility to a state to say, no, I am not going to maintain a privileged treatment for that investor because I have some public health system to protect. So my answer, Marina, is these leaders are dangerous, but the legal answer is that I come back to what I said minutes ago, we have the tools, we have the legal tools to show that we have the possibility to strike a fair balance between the various kind of interests which are at stake in the current crisis.
Thank you very much, Professor Pierre. It's such a pleasure to hear you. Your lesson today was very important to us. And I hope your Paris Saint-Germain have a good luck.
I'm not too much into Paris Saint-Germain. My club is another one. It's not.
Hey, what other club? I thought it's Paris Saint-Germain. You say Neymar.
Because Neymar, we all admire Neymar. But
what is your team?
My team is Nantes, in the west part of France.
Nantes, okay. Nantes, so good luck for your Nantes. And
thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure for me, Professor. Have you a nice day. Okay, be careful. Stay with your family, and so I hope we can. I hope we can have you with us in our times in Sedin, in another way, and I hope you come here to Brazil when this crisis passes.
I would love to come back to Brazil. I hope I will come back to Brazil as soon as it is possible, really. Don't invite me, because if you invite me, I will come, definitely.
Okay.
So, and I want to say thank you to all the students for their participation. Take care.
Professor.
Take care of yourself. Be cautious, but also keep optimistic. We, as I said, as international lawyers, we have a lot to do. International law is our language. So we have a lot to do, and we will have a lot to do in the coming years.
Yes, Professor. Very nice. Have a nice day, Professor Pierre. Such a pleasure.
Thank you, Mayra.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.